Okay, so we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Evin here. Evin, you're working on an incredibly important problem. I mean, you're trying to make sure that ID and verification of who you are is done through the blockchain world. I mean, it's something that's an incredibly important mission to focus on. You need to be able to have verification done, um, and you also have a whole track record of working with data and verification in a different company, and you've had some incredible experiences that built you up along the way to really get to this point today. So I'm excited to have you here and to get into your story.
Thank you so much for inviting me to the party, Ben. I'm really looking forward to discussing today.
Awesome. So just kind of going back to the beginning, like how did your interest in being in the, kind of the Web3 world, wanting to be somebody who was a business leader, how did this passion to just kind of do something different really begin?
So I grew up on a farm in Ohio, in a very small town that actually was so little it didn't have its own post office or a Walmart. And so I started in perhaps an unexpected corner of the world for someone who is so deeply focused on global technology. When I was young, I had a pretty, interesting upbringing where my parents rarely told me no, but often would add a lot of complexity and tasks along the way. So, for example, when I was a child and I wanted to use tools like Napster to download music, my parents made me present to them why this was a sanctioned instance of fair use of intellectual property and cite the fair use statute with my proposed utilization of this data. So it turns out that was how I ended up getting my first MP3 player. But either way, I think, just these opportunities to think a little more deeply and to ask more questions have definitely led to me developing, the way I think about the world today. When I was a student at Yale University, I actually started off in the engineering space. But one day I wandered into a senior computer science class where I definitely, as a junior student, was not allowed to be. But the professor was so gracious and so kind and let me stay. And she was, at the time, a young 20-something, but I think one of the greatest professors on earth, because instead of having us do problem sets or read long books, she would bring in her friends who were entrepreneurs to teach us about what they were building. And so it was through that experience that I met folks like Moot, the founder of 4chan, Alexis Ohanian of Reddit, and other, entrepreneurial fame. Folks like Aaron Schwartz, who is an early leader in free speech and freedom of information. May he rest in peace. And so there's a really incredible set of builders and energy that I was exposed to as a teenager. And it was actually through that group of folks that I learned what a startup was, what entrepreneurship was, and then eventually what Bitcoin was. And so it was through that very academic context of learning about cryptography, learning about distributed computing, that I first encountered decentralized technology. So I like to say, because a young woman introduced me to crypto and to cryptography, I never really got the memo that this space wasn't for me. I felt welcome and excited, and was learning along many other young folks about these new frontiers of the world. So happy to pause there and answer any questions, but have a few other adventures that we can get to along the way before we get to now.
So Evin, what was it like when you got introduced to Bitcoin? What was that experience like? What did you think initially the potential of this was?
So initially, it was basically homework to read this paper and to contemplate what censorship resistance would mean from a technical perspective. Now, I'm a little chagrined to admit that when I first learned about Bitcoin, I thought the financial element could be a distraction, because the most interesting thing about this network was that it was censorship resistant and self-healing. One of the computers in the network could go offline or even be broken and not work at all, and the remainder of the network would be able to continue its work. And I had never seen anything like that before. So the math nerd in me was just so interested and confused and excited about these new ideas. But really, crypto turned into basically like my hobby. Bitcoin was, how I spent my nights and weekends lurking around in the forums and going to meetups in the same way that some people like to watch football. And so I didn't actually understand that, this growing interest was going to one day become an industry. I thought it was just, a way that you could intellectually explore in a fun, studious area to spend some time. But after I was in school, I actually had a few roles that wound through human-centered design practices. So started actually working out here in Hollywood in production, supporting technical projects such as CERN and the Large Hadron Collider to secure basic
Mm.
science research funding, or helping to launch projects like IBM Watson, which is early in our days of user-facing AI. After that, I worked with connected hardware companies, built the first connected toothbrush, early connected vehicle to vehicle mesh networks. Today, we'll call that self-driving in our feature experience. And then in 2017, I was working at Berkshire Hathaway, developing insurance products with another one of my professors from school, when I got on a phone call with a gentleman named Joe Lubin, who started a company called Consensus to build out a network called Ethereum. And so in fall of 2017, I hung up my suit. I got on my last flight out of Omaha to New York City, and I started working in a little our little apartment above a pizza shop in Brooklyn to build this thing called Ethereum. So a couple of years later, started my own verifiable data platform called Disco.xyz.
Mm.
And then a couple of years into that, crossed paths with the co-founders of a project called Polygon, which is a multi-billion-dollar protocol in the tech space. And they were so taken with our technical solution, with our team, that not only did they want to pursue integration, we actually ended up being acquired and merging our teams. And so that's how I ended up as CEO of Privado ID, building unified identity so you can prove who you are in real life and anywhere in digital space in a private way. And that also brings us to Billions.network, which is the first universal human and AI network where we can bring that unique identity not only to human beings, but to their AI agents. So we can have accountable AI. I know where that bot comes from and who is accountable when that bot does bad things.
Mhm. So why do you think that the merge with Polygon made the most amount of sense? Was it a resource thing that they have? I mean, they have incredible resources, and it could really push this mission you were on much further.
So the team that I currently work with now, Privado ID, was actually incubated for a little while inside of Polygon. And
Huh.
as part of our joining hands, we spun out to become a totally independent company. But part of the reason I thought that the lineage of this team was so unique and complementary to what I had built is that and my teammates are, and I say this, with full honesty and without a hint of ego, perhaps some of the most skilled engineers on the face of the planet. And the
Mm.
reason I feel so confident in saying that is that the privacy preserving secure libraries, what we call zero knowledge, or the ability to learn about data without seeing it, the zero knowledge code libraries that our teammates wrote, or that that we're stewards of, are now the most widely used on Earth. So more
Huh.
than 9,000 companies, from TikTok to HSBC, rely on the work that our team, stewards and cares for. And so to that end, I think the complement of deep research, academic acumen, and this technical specific expertise, really as inventors, complemented the team that I had built that was really more focused on that sort of interface and user experience flow that would be really smooth and really friendly. So in this union, we brought together deep competency of how to interact with customers, have tight feedback loops, and a really friendly and smooth product with the most supercharged, super powered underlying technology the world has ever seen. And so in that way, I think our team has quite an unfair advantage. But it took, of course, a lot of contextual understanding and market awareness for me to recognize that actually this was going to bring my team and our investors the most unfair advantage to succeed by joining forces as opposed to proceeding ourselves.
Mhm. So why did you think that there was a need for the Billions network and for Bravado ID, and like how do they complement each other? Do they complement each other?
Yeah, absolutely. So Privado ID is a deep technical stack that includes infrastructure and protocols and lots of technical superpowers that don't usually come with a screen and buttons that you can click or a friendly app that you can download on your phone. Often, our work at Privado ID, as I've mentioned earlier, requires us to collaborate with very large enterprises, even folks like governments. And often, those entities really like to have their name on the screen and they want to choose what color those buttons are. And so, for much of our history as a team, our work has been a little bit under the hood. has been kind of the Intel inside for the computer that is your digital experience, let's say. And so we thought that perhaps one of the best ways to assert our unique expertise to take advantage of a lot of opportunities that we previously could not was to reach up to the app layer and have a friendly brand that folks can connect with. And we found actually that has worked really well. Focusing a simple application experience around actually the action you do is you take your passport or national ID card, you tap it to your phone, and your phone uses the NFC chip to
Hmm.
pull all of the data out, but store it in a way that no program, not even ours, can ever be able to access it. So you keep a little secret on your phone, known only to you and your phone, and then you can prove things about it. So prove that you're over the age of 18 without revealing what your actual birthday is.
Hmm. So you really try to make this as like identity secure, safe, as you possibly can while gathering information that you need. It's like this fine line.
Exactly. And I think many people often think about sharing information about themselves and privacy and consent as opposites. That
Mm.
if you want to share information about yourself to receive a personalized experience in an app, that means you have to give up your consent and privacy over the information you're sharing. And that is just not true. So thanks to the mathematicians on our team, you no longer have to expose the original information about yourself to prove that you are qualified to interact in a certain app or a certain space. Whether that's proof that you are an American citizen, proof that you are on the KYC approval list, or proof that you're over the age of 16.
Mhm. Do you think your background at Berkshire Hathaway has been valuable to you now? Because you have a ton of Web3 experiences. We talked about consensus. I know you've been involved in different DAOs that you've created, decentralized autonomous organizations. You're building a block, almost two different blockchain entities right now. Was Berkshire Hathaway in like the traditional kind of corporate world? Was that something that was really valuable to you?
I think about it every single day. So,
Really?
one of the really valuable experiences that I had working at Berkshire Hathaway and developing insurance products and doing technical diligence is that risk management is the top of every agenda in those meetings. Understanding how do we quantify or assess the risks that a business is taking so that they can purchase the appropriate amount of insurance coverage. Now, for example, this came up earlier this morning, in fact, when we were talking with some of our colleagues in the AI space who were saying, we don't know how to build accountable AI. How do we create an insurance policy for a company that's using ChatGPT as their support bot? Because it doesn't come from inside their company, but there isn't really a separate product for this yet. And in fact, very recently, I believe it was the Air Canada airline was using ChatGPT as a chatbot support bot on their website. And the chatbot began making up airplane tickets that didn't exist. And so they got sued. They had to honor those airplane tickets because they did not have an insurance product that would be able to cover that type of interaction. Now, why does that product not exist? It's an identity problem because how do you create an identity for an AI agent that can pertain to a specific insurance policy? And so our team recently released a paper called Deep Trust, which allows you to do just that, to assign an identity to an AI agent, to relate it back to your human identity that you've proved by tapping your passport to your phone, and to do so in a manner that is private, but can allow for accountability if your bot does bad things. And so it's, aspects of risk management, of business process, and quite frankly, of business discipline. One of the wonderful things that I learned working in Omaha, wearing a suit to work every day, is basically the foundational building blocks. When I would go fill up my water bottle, I would have to walk past like 10 pictures of Warren Buffett to do that in the office. And so being around a culture that is so strongly solidified in its practice, in its seriousness, in its rituals was very educational to me because it offers a contrast to the way that many businesses in emerging tech fields operate. And so it's been, really helpful for me to have the context of both.
Yeah, I can see how that was now. It makes a lot more sense. Especially you're kind of dealing with a lot of problems that are you're trying to solve problems in the traditional space with innovative technology. So understanding both is very helpful. Um, if you kind of like look at the trajectory now of AI and blockchain, right? Like the blockchain has been I mean, AI is now being something that's talked about a lot more. Blockchain had like a similar almost trend, and everyone wanted to do something blockchain related. Everyone wants to do something AI related. Do you see, I mean, it seems like you see those working together really nicely. Like, how do you see blockchain and AI working together most going forward? And like, do you think that they are meant to be really hand in hand developed? I mean, it seems like that's a direction that you want to go, go in right now.
So two buzzwords, walk into a bar. No, I'm just kidding. But, really though, I think the question you pose is one that a lot of folks are having right now. What is the relationship, if any, that exists between these two emerging tech fields?
Yeah.
And so I would almost think about it kind of like a yin and a yang, these complementary sides of technology. AI to me represents the capacity for infinite generation, infinite creation, whereas blockchains introduce verifiable scarcity. And so between the two, if we want to be able to determine where data came from, if it has been changed, who is associated with it, I think a blockchain offers a really excellent way for us to maintain timestamps and to keep track of the original state of information. And AI, on the other hand, is a fantastic tool to allow us to consume and interpret data, as well as to produce that data. So I think of each as kind of a check or the complementary set of the other.
Mhm. Yeah, I see that. I mean, I think they're going to both work together really nicely as things progress. And
Certainly. Well,
yeah,
and also in addition to that, it's a little cheeky, but I like to say that crypto is machine money. When
Mm,
we discuss about half of the internet traffic today comes from unaccountable, unidentified bots. But then,
mm,
this begs the question, what about good actors? What about my bots that are doing actions on my behalf? How does
mm.
your AI agent know that it's talking to my AI agent? Those agents need identity. That identity really implies accountability back to a real person or a real business. And so, if we want to facilitate groups of agents that work together, we also want to be able to facilitate payments so that we're not the sort of the last click for everything. And facilitating payments for AI agents, I believe, is most straightforward and most logical using crypto. And we've already seen examples where AI agents can easily be assigned crypto wallets. In fact, our teammates over at Coinbase have Agent Kit, which makes this process really swift and easy. And so we've already seen instances of AI agents posting bounties of work to be done and other AI agents performing the work and
Right.
receiving payment from that first agent. And so now we have an AI to AI economy that is being born.
Wow. Wow. That's very forward thinking. Yeah. So when you think about practicality of blockchain, I mean, you named some things you're working on that seem to be very practical. There's been so many people that have bought NFTs, they've bought crypto. Part of I think the interest is because they think it can go up in value. A lot of people think that today. How do you see this becoming part of everyone's lives? Is this something that's a back end technology mostly that will be powering a lot of the things you do? How does it become more practical for people?
So I think crypto, like cryptography, which is the math and technology made possible by blockchains, and then separately cryptocurrencies, the individual financial assets that folks are able to interact with directly through exchanges and wallets. I almost think those might kind of diverge, where the cryptographic security that teams like ours work on, I think, and ideally, no human being should need a PhD to understand the app that they're using. You don't need to be able to understand the complexities of public and private key pairs and things of that nature. Of course, you can always learn more if you want to read the docs, but I think in an ideal setting, applications and services that are, rely on cryptographic tools should be just as friendly and easy, if not easier to use than the apps that we already have today. Um, so kind of when I think about that future state, I would compare it actually to the moment that we're having right now. You and I are having a lovely conversation, and not once have we mentioned TCP/IP or
Yeah.
HTTPS or any of the technical protocols that are allowing us to be on this call here together today. And so I think similarly that things like Layer 1 Ethereum are likely to fade into the background as tech enablers that offer better experiences at the surface, but don't require you to actually understand the technical network underneath that's making them possible.
Yeah, I see it as similar, being done a similar way too. I think it's the blockchain itself is not meant to be forward facing, and what people aren't going to see it, but it could be powering a lot of stuff that's going on. And it's going to keep increasing and doing that. Yeah.
Definitely agreed. Definitely agreed. And I think it's also clear that as a global population, we are learning what it means to interact with blockchains. And so when I started working in this space, many of the common products and ideas that folks use in crypto every day were distant concepts. The idea of an exchange traded fund presented by a traditional business entity that has something like Ethereum or Bitcoin associated with it was a totally foreign concept back in 2017, or at least it felt much further away then. And so I think we're going to continue to see emergence in business use cases that can benefit from blockchains based on better performance. And I think we're going to see a little bit less of this technical fetishism or the fascination with specific speculative aspects of the technology. I think that will, of course, always exist, but will likely become less prominent as more product market fit for tangible business solutions arise.
Mhm. So what do you think now is your like kind of 5 to 10 year trajectory, as of this point? Because you're trying to solve a big problem. I think that you're trying to also replace a lot of the way traditional identity verification is done, with what you're doing. So, I mean, there's kind of like two different markets. Like you've got this blockchain space, which, may even be easier to go in, but you've got this traditional space that I could be really benefit from your solution. How do you see that? Like, how do you see like that happening? What are some actionable items you're trying to focus on right now that are short-term goals, long-term goals? And like, what's the big picture vision?
That's a great question, right? What does growth look like in a world where our immediately adjacent teams and neighbors are well literate of the problem to be solved, and the large opportunity space where our roadmap is heading is full of folks who've never heard of a blockchain before? How do we balance those two? And
Mhm.
so, sort of similar to the yin and yang we discussed earlier, I like to think about this as bottom up plus top down. So, kind of a two-sided strategy. So, what bottom up growth means is community driven, developer driven, more sort of Web3 native, where we have really active, really engaged communities. This is where Billions.network has started our sort of external brand engagement to great success. In fact, we have over, actually, I think almost 600,000 pre registrations right now for the app that's going to be coming out in about a month that we're currently testing some private cohorts. We've got I believe just over 200,000 in our Twitter account, just over 300,000 in our Discord. So early traction has been really awesome. However, we recognize it is not a scalable method for us to knock on the door of every single person on earth and invite them to download our app. And so that's why it's really important that we complement that engagement, that energy, that population of tens of thousands of people who are daily making memes of my face because they love the project so much. On the other hand, we complement that with what we call top down. And so what that means is the long multi-year sales cycles of engaging with governments, of engaging with enterprises who bring insane size to the order of millions of users, but require a little bit more special attention, a little bit of a different technical implementation sometimes, and a lot of interpersonal trust. So just to give you an example there, some of the colleagues who I worked with in the GCC in 2017 and 2018 are still leaders in blockchain and business there. And so they're actually the counterparties who, today in 2025 are our partners as we start to build out government services in the Gulf region. And so obviously that's quite a few years in between to develop those relationships, to build appropriate technology, and to be in a place where, we have both sufficient trust and accountability for everyone to feel good moving forward. So although we have many of these government and enterprise partnerships, they are quite long processes for us to get to. And it's important that we start to receive feedback and support the community with our capabilities immediately. There's no reason for us to wait for them. And so in this manner, we kind of complement a more traditional business development relationship management practice with community management, community engagement, and developer relations.
Hmm. Yeah, there's a lot to go here, in terms of the potential, which I think is exciting. And it's great you already have a highly engaged community built around this that cares about the mission and what you're trying to do here. I think that's so important to have that foundation.
It has really been, I gotta say, like face meltingly surprising to, I mean, of course, I know our team is outstanding. The work we do is fantastic, but just the positive reception we received from the community was such a great affirmation that we are on the right track. So whether it's, leading news publications, telling the world that we are squaring up with WorldCoin because we have a better technical solution than Sam Altman, or the, tens of thousands of students who have found their way into our community and have started even bringing in our technical solutions into their own homework. And so there's a lot of really interesting and exciting emergent stuff happening on both edges. I'll also say as well that even though they are a little more traditional, some of our colleagues and partners in the government space are really progressive and have started to bring in really interesting and unique things, such as the ability to prove users' age without exposing their data, which is a really important capability in places like here in the United States, where that law is becoming a little more complicated, places like Australia as well.
Mhm. Well, Evan, that was all the questions that I had. I appreciate you taking the time and doing this. I think it's something that is fascinating, the solution you've built. It's a different type of solution. It's innovative, and we need people building exciting things like this to solve major problems. So I'm excited to see where you're going to take it and what's going to come next, and how people are going to have a new, better way to have identity verified and stored securely. So wish much success with that.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for having me today. Really appreciate all your thoughtful questions. If your listeners are interested in following along and joining our journey, you can always find me on Twitter at Proven Authority. You can also follow our projects at Privado ID, Privado ID on Twitter, and at billions_NTWK. If I were to leave your listeners with one last piece of guidance, if there are any female and non-binary folks out there that are interested in learning more about crypto, decentralized technology, and how to become a leader in this industry, I highly recommend that you check out SheFi, SHEFI.org, which is a global community educating women and non-binary folks on the edge of frontier tech. So for all our future leaders, all our growing leaders, all our established leaders who want to be able to expand their expertise, highly encourage those materials.
Awesome. People should definitely check it out.